News!
Okay, we'll start with this. It was announced yesterday. Queensberry Promotions has signed yet another female fighter to their stable, Nicola Barke, otherwise known as the Burmese Python. We know that in previous years, Queensberry, like Matchroom, has attempted to get with the times and roll with the punches and signed a female fighter here and there wherever they can. I will say that Queensberry hasn't made the same investment in women's boxing, the same mark, the same dent that Matchroom has, though all the same. They're doing what they can.
And it's good to see it.
Some may recall that when Olympic double gold medalist Nicola Adams debuted as a professional, she remained with Queensberry for the duration of her short professional career. Currently, they have unbeaten up-and-comer in the featherweight division, Raven Chapman, under contract, and now they have Nicola Barke,
who sports a professional record of 4 wins, no losses, and no draws, no knockouts, having never been knocked out in 4 professional bouts.
Nicola Barke comes from a varied combat background. Some experience in Taekwondo, some experience in kickboxing,
and Lethaway, but here she is in the sport of boxing, campaigning at or around welterweight. Welterweight, that is 147 pounds.
It's where America's own Jessica McCaskill holds the WBA and WBC titles. The United Kingdom's own Sandy Ryan, she's got the WBO, as well as the UK's own Natasha Jonas. She's got the IBF. This is where Nicola Barke campaigns, having debuted as a professional in November of 2021. She's fought 4 times since then, last in action in March of this year, opposite the ring, Laura Riollo. She's with a major promotional outfit now, so I'm expecting to see more of her moving forward. Nicola, she's got very good physical dimensions for a welterweight, distinct possibilities that one day she could see herself campaigning as high as junior middle and maybe even middle. Shows a good jab, but her defense could stand to be a little better.
She does get touched up here and there in between the punches,
but she does show a good jab, a consistent jab. Her best punches seem to be her straight punches.
She's got to tidy it up, though. Like I said, she does get caught here and there between the shots, though for a 4-0 fighter, a 4-0 prospect,
there's more work needs doing, and that's obvious, though she's got great physical dimensions for the weight, shows a good jab, decent movement, though her feet look a little heavy at times.
She can move around.
Little bit upright, doesn't really seem to bend at the waist and bend at the knees. These are all areas that need working on, though. You have to bear in mind that this is a 4-0 prospect, a 4-0 fighter with a varied combat background, so there are obviously going to be things that need working on, but she shows promise, shows ability. Looks like there's power in those shots, even though she doesn't have any recorded knockouts, not yet.
Her best punches seem to be her straight punches from the outside coming in.
Campaigning at or around welterweight, a division that's set to heat up within the next 12 months with the presence of Jessica McCaskill and Sandy Ryan, what could be their rematch in the coming year, Natasha Jonas and Michaela Mayer's potential fight. That's something we've talked about several times, as well as Chantel Cameron. Chantel Cameron, who you have to figure, win or lose with Katie Taylor, she's not going to stay at 140 pounds. She might move up to 147.
As stated, within the next 12 months, things are set to heat up at 147 pounds, and Nicola Barke is coming in at the right time. She's a part of that scene.
Queensberry Promotions that have made several additions to their existing stable of fighters, Solomon Dakers, Nicola Barke, several others. I look forward to seeing what they can do for this fighter and how far she can go. Elsewhere in the world of boxing, boxing insider Rick Lacier stated, Erislandy Lara, Danny Garcia, and Keith Thurman, all 3 didn't fight this year. Thank you to these 3 for doing us all a favor by not fighting. That's the PBC way. Imagine what will happen to these 3 in 2024 with Showtime Boxing out of the business and with Al Heyman's Amazon distribution only deal with no guaranteed money. These guys won't be fighting at all again, as they'll continue to overprice themselves out of their market value. Retirement looms large for these 3 old-timers.
It was originally thought that all 3 of these guys would be boxing on a December 9th show, the same day as the Haney vs. Prograis pay-per-view, but apparently those plans were scrapped by the PBC.
And we talked about that in a previous video here on the channel, as Oscar De La Hoya makes a public service announcement to those same PBC fighters saying, attention PBC fighters without a promoter contract, call my headquarters and let's make some good fights happen, accenting what I've been telling you, that if Al Heyman can't get a broadcast partner that's going to make a commitment and give him an annual budget to keep his fighters busy throughout the calendar year, what might start to happen is some of those fighters you used to see on Showtime, you used to see under the PBC banner, some of them, at least some, are going to start to float away, wherever the fight dates and wherever the opportunities are. Oscar continued.
Somebody asked Oscar about what fighters under the PBC banner are under contract and what fighters aren't, to which Oscar replied, every single fighter at the PBC has no promotional contract. Too complicated to explain because you all don't know shit about boxing.
If you've been paying attention over the years, the PBC is primarily comprised of small promotional outfits, smaller than a Matchroom, smaller than a Top Rank, some smaller even than a Golden Boy Promotions. Think Samson Lukowicz, his fighters, his stable of guys.
Tom Brown and his fighters, TGB Promotions, Chino Maidana Promotions in recent years, Lou DiBella Entertainment and his fighters in previous years.
Mayweather Promotions, who never really had all that big a stable to begin with. What the PBC has been doing is working with several smaller promotional outfits, while on paper, the PBC themselves never claimed to be a promotional outfit, even though they very much operate like one, brokering deals with broadcasters for annual budgets to put on these fights, to put on these shows.
What's that all about?
Al Heyman doesn't want to get caught out there acting as both advisor, manager, and promoter, because that would leave him in direct violation of the Muhammad Ali Act. Thus, his way of murkying up and muddying up the waters is to compartmentalize, while the PBC very much acts like a promotional outfit and he very much acts like a promoter.
He disguises that by operating under the guise of an advisor, just an advisor. But you tell me, what advisor brokers deals with major networks like Fox and Showtime, what have you? What advisor does that? Seems more like something a promoter would do.
In any event, the PBC and their fighters, they don't got a broadcast partner right now, and even if rumor has it that they may go into business with Amazon, it's little more than just a distribution deal, a platform to distribute their pay-per-views without any actual commitment to the PBC from Amazon. Thus, they would use such a deal for their high-priority fighters and their high-priority fights. There's widespread speculation that Gervonta Davis versus Isaac Cruz may kick off that partnership early next year with a rematch between them. Fighters like Gervonta and Canelo Alvarez, his two remaining fights on his existing deal with Al Heyman, as well as a proposed Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. rematch. You have to figure that that's what they're going to peddle on Amazon. But where does that leave the rest of the fighters?
The ones that have been boxing on Showtime under the PBC banner, but don't really have much of a profile. Where does that leave them?
Some ways the exodus has already started. In some ways the exodus started months ago. Several months ago in August, you saw Gerald Washington, a heavyweight you would normally see on the undercards of PBC shows, boxing on a Matchroom show, on a Matchroom undercard. Opposite the ring, Derek Chisora. 2 months before that, in June, you saw Adam Kovnowski, a heavyweight you would normally see boxing on the undercards of PBC shows. You saw him opposite the ring, Joe Cusumano, on a Matchroom show, on a Matchroom undercard. So in some ways, the exodus for some of the PBC's fighters, it's already started. It started months ago.
Some of those fighters already started floating away. They started floating away months ago.
Now, can we expect to see the same thing happen with Danny Garcia, Keith Thurman, Erislandy Lara, and with those three guys, with those three in particular? No, I'm not expecting them to go to Golden Boy or Matchroom. When it comes to those three, what I figure is that they were going to go ahead and do that show on December 9th, but then realized, why waste those fights? Why waste that content on Showtime when we all know Showtime's leaving boxing, when we can offer that up to Amazon? We can offer that card up to a new broadcast partner as content for them. That's what I think happened there.
But Rick Glacier, he did raise a valid point when it comes to those three fighters. those three in particular, they think they're supposed to get an arm and a leg every time they get out there, which makes it harder for a promotional outfit to get them out there because you're not actually good for the kind of money you're asking for.
And when they don't get you out there and you don't fight on a regular basis, on a regular schedule, well, what kind of marquee value do you expect to have on a schedule like that? The irony of it all is that if they were to change their decorum and see about going somewhere else, fighting under another banner, that would give their careers a shot in the arm, get them talked about, keep them in the news without them actually being in a fight. Just that by itself would create a ripple effect. But these guys, Keith Thurman, Danny Garcia, Erislandy Lara, I get the sense they don't really want to fight per se. Not really. They just want to cash out one last time, make a little bit of money before they bow out from the sport. They're not even the oldest fighters around.
Keith and Danny. Now, Lara's pretty fucking old. But Keith and Danny,
they're really not the oldest fighters out there per se, not the oldest fighters around. They just lack motivation. They lack ambition. They don't really want to do this anymore.
And that's saying that while I do expect to see some of the PBC's fighters float away, I don't expect those fighters to be either Keith Thurman, Danny Garcia, or Erislandy Lara.
I expect those fighters to go down with the ship. If the ship does, in fact, go down, those have been some of the PBC's flagship fighters.
And I expect them to stay put. It's the other guys, the guys that ain't high-profile guys, at least not to the PBC, what are not high-priority fighters.
Some of them might go to Matchroom. Some already have. Some might go to Golden Boy. That's what Oscar De La Hoya seems to want. It seems that the chickens have come home to roost in many ways because upon the PBC's inception, how Al Heyman got all of that started was with 200 or so fighters that he stole, 200 or so fighters that he siphoned from Golden Boy Promotions. They say God don't like ugly.
And karma's a bitch.
When you think about the state of that stable, that entire crop of fighters that the PBC started out with approximately 7 or 8 years ago, however long it's been, Al Heyman didn't turn any of those guys into the next Mayweather.
The vast majority of them have either retired or faded into obscurity, like Keith Thurman, like Danny Garcia, Errol Spence Jr., he's got one foot halfway out the door, and Sean Porter, he was out the door over a year ago. He retired.
Deontay Wilder, he's quasi-retired, as is Luis Ortiz. What's actually left of the PBC stable? That's a separate question.
What do they have left?
In men's light heavyweight news, WBA champion Dmitry Bivol's return is tabled for early next year in Las Vegas, effectively meaning that he will have sat out the entirety of this year. And you wonder if Vadim Kornilov and Dmitry would have known that he was going to spend the entire year on the bench, would they have played the Canelo Alvarez situation the way that they played it? Bivol looks to return in January, possibly January 13th in Las Vegas. And then we want to make the Artur Beterbiev fight. There's been a few approaches about that fight, Hearn told pro boxing fans. The WBC, WBO, and IBF champion Beterbiev and Bivol had an impromptu face-off in Saudi Arabia during the week of Tyson Fury versus Francis Ngannou. That was last week. We talked about that, adding further anticipation to their much-desired, undisputed light heavyweight title fight. But Artur Beterbiev quipped that Bivol only talks about fighting and never fights. And we talked about that. We talked about that as well, how it's not one-sided. Artur is guilty of the same things he's accusing Dmitry of. Artur in the past has talked about fighting Dmitry and wanting undisputed, but he hasn't fought him yet. In fact, his promoter has poured cold water on that idea, the idea of that fight, more than once. Beterbiev will be fighting January 13th against former super middleweight champion Callum Smith in Quebec City, Canada. The fight was originally supposed to take place August 19th, but the show was postponed when Beterbiev suffered a bone infection to his jaw and underwent surgery. The idea that Eddie wants to get Dmitry Bivol out there the same day, the same night as Beterbiev versus Smith is in somewhat poor taste because Callum Smith, he is your fighter.
If you do a show the same night of that fight, aren't you averting eyes away from his fight over to Dmitry's? And who is it that Dmitry would be facing? Kalajdzic?
I saw that name being bounced around earlier this week. as a potential opponent for Dmitry Bivol. And if I had to choose, I'd a consumer, between Beterbiev versus Smith or Bivol versus Kalajdzic, I'm watching Beterbiev versus Smith. It's a better fight. I truly believe Callum Smith wins that fight by way of knockout, said Hearn, who promotes Smith. So if we can do Callum Smith against Bivol for undisputed, even better. We'll have to see. Eddie's got his fingers crossed. Not everyone is as confident that Callum can pull the upset in Quebec as Eddie is. Perhaps it's just wide-eyed naivety, wide-eyed optimism that Callum can do the business against the biggest puncher at the weight.
Blind hope is what it is, blind faith. Because if Callum can pull the upset, that turns a Smith versus Bivol fight into an in-house deal, what would be an in-house situation between matchroom fighters. Suddenly, promotional and network politics, they don't even come into it anymore. That would be the silver lining.
So as far as the fight and Callum pulling the upset, well, Callum was flustered by the pressure of John Ryder, who some think arguably beat him. He was flustered by the pressure of Canelo Alvarez. These are naturally smaller men, naturally smaller fighters that don't hit anywhere near as hard as Artur Beterbiev. So the idea that he's going to get froggy with Artur, where he didn't get froggy with them, it's a tough sell.
Now, rumor has it that Dmitry Bivol may be having a run-out fight with Hot Rod, maybe having a run-out fight with Kalajdzic. And like I just said, if I gotta choose between Beterbiev versus Smith or Bivol versus Kalajdzic, I'm watching Beterbiev versus Smith.
The saving grace is that in this modern day and age, you don't actually have to choose. You can watch one fight on your television and another on your tablet or smartphone, though I will admit, one fight would have my attention more than the other, and that is the Beterbiev versus Smith fight. There's more on the line. There would be. Whereas Bivol versus Kalajdzic, that's just a keep busy fight. That's just a run out.
Dmitry needs it. He hasn't fought this entire year.
The consequence of overplaying his hand with Canelo Alvarez, thinking that he'd have other options to fall back on, apparently not. They tried for Joshua Buatsi. They tried for Dan Aziz. They even tried to make the undisputed fight, but the Bivol people said the offer wasn't serious enough.
They better get fucking real next year, because you see what happened this one.
He didn't fight. 2022 was the biggest year in Bivol's boxing career, but 2023 was a complete waste. It was a wash, and he doesn't need another year like that one.